So this new Mustang GTD is peak Ford in my opinion. See, what Ford have done is essentially taken the Mustang, which in its base form is literally a rental car, and cranked it up to 11 to take on the top supercars of the world, which is just so cool. But how did Ford go from a heavy, solid rear axle Mustang with one of the worst performance V8s in recent memory in the form of the 4.6 3-valve V8 to a Mustang, remember, Mustang, that's set to demolish the foreign competition at their own game? Real quick, to understand just how big of a deal this GTD is, I'm sorry to say it, but we gotta do a quick trip down memory lane. Now, I'm not going to be going over the full history of the Mustang, obviously. That could be an hours-long essay in and of itself. I'm instead just going to stick to the history, starting with this sexy beast, the S197. Prior to the S197, Ford was looking to revive the Mustang. See, interest in the Mustang and basically all big performance cars in America were down as a whole pretty drastically going into the new millennia. Younger, cooler buyers looked overseas for performance cars like AMGs, 240SXs, any BMW M car, and so much more. It got so bad, American manufacturers started making their own tuner cars, which had mixed success, to put it kindly. Anyways though, Ford knew that they had to change up their soon-to-be new Mustang or face losing even more ground to overseas cars eating up even more of their market. They decided to go back to their roots and opted for a retro design, meant to remind people of the OG first-gen Mustang. This new retro Mustang debuted in 2003 at the North American Auto Show in Detroit, and people went ballistic. Understandably so. The Mustang seemed to have gone through some sort of identity crisis in the 80s and 90s. It didn't really know what it wanted to be. Not that there's anything wrong with the Fox bodies or the SN95s, I actually really like them. It's just that it didn't scream American muscle, and Ford was looking to change that. So the S197 was the start of what would end up being a decades-long project that would lead us to the GTD, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's get back to the S197. This Mustang debuted in base form with a V6, but the one that you want is the GT, which debuted for the public to buy in 2005. This came with a 3-valve 4.6-liter V8 pumping out 300 horsepower roughly, with the 3 valves meaning that 2 valves pump fuel in and 1 valve pumps exhaust gases out. This engine, while reliable, is notorious for not being the best platform for modding, to put it nicely. That, paired with the fact that it still uses a solid rear axle setup while its overseas competitors had switched to independent suspension like forever ago, meant that people looking to mod these were going to be facing an uphill battle, for now at least. These hiccups aside though, it performed well sales-wise, all things considered. Sales did dip during the 2007 to 2008 area, but there was pretty good reasoning for that if my memory serves me correctly. It got a refresh in 2010, which saw an enhanced version of the 3-valve dropped in, cranking up the horsepower to 315 horsepower, but you really don't want the 2010 model year Mustangs, as just 1 year later, you could get a new V8, and this wasn't your average run-of-the-mill V8. This 5-liter V8 is still widely seen as one of the, if not the best V8s for modding in the world. The engine, codenamed Coyote, really beefed up the horsepower output, debuting with a little over 410 horsepower. That's almost 100 more than the year prior. There were some super cool special edition S197s as well, with my personal favorites being the later GT500s, which is the best GT500 ever, it's not a contest, and the Boss 302 Laguna Seca, which just looks like awesome. Now, while Ford was distracting us with this awesome new Coyote, they started chefing up an entirely new Mustang, and this time, they were finally going to pit the Mustang against foreign competition. The next-gen Mustang, chassis coded as the S550, made its debut worldwide at the end of 2013 at events all over the world in places like New York City, Los Angeles, Australia, China, and more. A lot of people were stoked as it finally ditched the solid rear axle in favor of a full independent suspension setup in all 4 corners. Others, they knew it was the end of the Mustang really being an old-fashioned pony/muscle car, and had now finished transforming into a sports car. Whatever your opinions are though, there is no denying that this is a drop-dead gorgeous car and one of the best generations of Mustangs ever. It debuted with a V6, the same Coyote V8, and new, compared to the last generation, a turbocharged 4-cylinder EcoBoost, which would also find its way into other performance cars like the Ford Focus RS. For all the hate the EcoBoost Mustang gets, personally I kinda like it. A lightweight engine in a lightweight sports car sounds kinda cool, but I'm getting off track. That's not the engine you obviously really want. It's the Coyote. The new Mustang GT debuted with a slightly tweaked Coyote, now capable of 430 horsepower from factory. This is the Mustang you want to get your grimy, disgusting hands on to tune. The independent suspension paired with the new and improved Coyote meant that people were making just about every type of build with this new platform. They were making drag builds, time attack, street builds, track builds, and way more. These Coyotes are easily capable of north of 1500 horsepower and are notorious for not needing a lot to absolutely smoke cars like Hellcats and ZL1s. All that is cool enough, but I really meant it when I said Ford was going to fight tooth and nail against the foreign competition, and they came out the gates swinging. Shortly after the regular Mustang was announced, they revealed the Shelby GT350 and the 350R, and this is, in my opinion, no joke, one of the greatest cars ever made. I don't want to go too in depth on it here, but this car was revolutionary for the American auto industry. It was fast and good looking for a dirt cheap price. I'm just going to cover this thing's highlight reel real quick. The 350R comes with carbon fiber wheels. It was only the second or third vehicle ever made, depending on who you ask, with carbon fiber wheels as an option. In addition, it had an absolutely massive rear wing. A Tremec 6-speed also replaced those whiskey dick standard Mustang manuals, and that was paired to this thing's piece de resistance, a 5.2-liter naturally aspirated V8, which is cool enough, but this V8 wasn't your normal American V8. This was a manual Mustang with a flat plain crank V8. Yeah, Ford did it way before Chevy shit out the Z06. The flat plain crank V8 in the Mustang is good for over 500 horsepower and revs well past 8,000 RPM, making this one of the best sounding engines out there right now and probably of all time. Somehow, Ford managed to perfectly blend the rumble of American V8 muscle and the high-pitched scream of a flat plain crank engine. There are so many other cool S550s as well, like the King of the Hill GT500, the Mach 1, the Bullet, and more. Now, the S550 got a minor update in 2018 with different gauge clusters, updated engines, Apple CarPlay, and stuff like that. Overall, it was a great start for the Mustang as a sports car. I don't think it could have gone much better in terms of sales and just how cool all the different variants of Mustangs are. This did cause a problem for Ford though, although I gotta admit, it's a pretty good problem to have. And that problem is, how the hell do you one-up a car like the S550 when moving on to the next gen of Mustang? Ford seems to have solved said problem as they revealed the new S650 Mustang at the 2022 North American Auto Show in Detroit. People were pretty hyped on it, as on its debut, Ford announced the first special edition S650 in the form of the Mustang Dark Horse. First off though, for this generation, gone was the V6. Instead, you could only get either the 4-cylinder EcoBoost or the V8, which is the right way to go in my opinion. The standard GT keeps an updated version of the beloved Coyote and ups the power to about 485. That's paired with that awful, limp, mushy, and overall unreliable 6-speed in the standard GT. You could also get a 10-speed auto, which performs pretty well. It also gets Brembo brakes, a rear Torsen LSD, upgraded front struts, and more. And that's just on the GT. The Dark Horse gets just about the fattest Brembos they can fit on there. And sitting right above those are some carbon fiber wheels, which I gotta say look ugly as hell. Don't get me wrong, I'd still option them because honestly I'm a fiend for carbon fiber wheels, but god damn, those things look like they came off an 05 Pontiac. Anyways, you also get chassis tuning, an electronic drift brake, a re-geared 3.73 rear LSD, a MagnaRide suspension, and more. All those things are cool, but the power upgrade is kinda lacking in my opinion. The Dark Horse gets about 500 horsepower, which hey, I mean, something's better than nothing, and 500 horsepower is still a handful. But still, a 15 horsepower jump over the regular GT, I mean, I don't know, it just kind of doesn't seem like it's enough, but that's just me. The GT350 had a crazy horsepower jump over the standard GT. The Dark Horse just doesn't seem to cut it. Again, I'm not saying it's cool, I would 100% scoop one up, but it just doesn't seem like a big enough jump up from the GT. And I personally felt like they were kind of missing that big jump in horsepower in the lineup. That was until August of last year, when Ford dropped the mother of all bombshells when they revealed the Mustang GTD. Now, to be honest, calling this thing a Mustang is being incredibly generous, as this hulking beast of a vehicle is so far removed from being a standard Mustang, it could easily be considered its own vehicle. This GTD is basically a road-legal version of their new GT3 race cars. Obviously, some things had to be changed to make it road legal, but there are really no holds barred on this thing. Starting with this guts. It uses the same 5.2 Predator V8 found in the GT500 from last generation, but Ford cranked that shit up to 11, and now it's whipping up 800 horsepower. And that's made it to a Tremec dual-clutch transaxle, a first in a Mustang road car. Now, the reason Ford picked the transaxle is because this is a front mid-engine layout, and even though it's technically mid-engine, the vast majority of the vehicle's weight would have been up front if they used a standard transmission, so they went with the rear transaxle, which shifted a ton of weight to the rear, helping the GTD get to its perfect 50-50 weight distribution. And as crazy as that is, we're only just getting started. The same engine is now using a dry sump oil system, with the massive oil reservoir needed for said system taking the place of where the transmission would normally be, helping keep the heavy weight of the oil as far down low and center to the vehicle as possible, which is honestly pretty smart and unique, I gotta say. The suspension on this monster has been totally reworked over the standard Mustangs, swapping out the regular double ball joint struts for unequal length control arms. Definitely not on the high level of something like a pushrod setup, but something tells me it'll be more than enough to get the job done. But the suspension goodies are only just getting started, as Multimatic themselves have completely reworked the dampers on the Mustang. These dampers use the same basic setup you'd find on something like a Camaro Z28 or the Ford GT, the DSSV or Dynamic Suspension Spool Valve setup. This has also been used in the kart series before they folded, and was also used on the Red Bull Championship F1 cars from 2010 to 2013. This, though, is a completely new setup, and honestly, far too complex for me to truly explain in this video, as that tangent would go on for about an hour. But just know that this system is so complex that on the GTD, there will be 16 different bump and rebound settings just for the dampers. That's just nuts. To put it into picture, when you put this thing into track mode, it'll drop the car by more than 1.5 inches. Ford and Multimatic have also enlisted the help of Krapovic, you know, that aftermarket exhaust company nobody knows how to pronounce, but also they're honestly more known for their motorcycle exhaust, not really car exhaust. But I mean, I'm eager to see how it sounds. They're obviously putting the exhaust on this GTD. It should hopefully be good. Speaking of the exterior though, this thing's aero is no joke. Standard, it comes with a rear wing that would make a GT3 RS blush, but you can option a similar wing, but with a very key difference. It will be using active aero and DRS, which will pair to an active front axle flaps that you wouldn't be able to see from the outside looking in. Think something similar to what's on the Pagani Huayra. Just under that skyscraper of a rear wing though would normally be a trunk, but not on this Mustang. The GTD has a massive transaxle cooler where the trunk would normally be because, like I said before, the transmission is now in the rear axle, not behind the engine. Speaking of said rear transaxle, power gets from the engine to that transaxle by the way of a carbon fiber drive shaft, which is a very common theme on this Mustang. Every single body panel on this GT is carbon fiber except for the door skins, which is kind of weird, but yeah, I mean, whatever works, I guess. That's on top of the massive carbon fiber under tray that guides air into the carbon fiber rear diffuser. Put all that lightweight, aggressive aero together, and this Mustang will be producing more downforce than a GT3 RS when at speed. All that weight savings isn't over yet though, as if you move down to the wheels, you could option magnesium wheels, which saves you a ton of unsprung weight. And just behind those wheels are massive carbon ceramic brakes, helping this feather-light supercar come to a stop in the blink of an eye. So obviously there's a question that needs to be asked. With all these crazy things, how the hell is Ford ever going to be able to top this? Well, honestly, I'm sure they'll find a way. Ford CEO Jim Farley recently came out and said that they will continue to pump out cars with V8 until they're essentially forced to stop. This is great news, as Dodge and Chevy have axed their V8 performance cars, and Ford knows that they have them cornered and is taking full advantage of it. As for the next immediate S650 Mustang, well, honestly, your guess is as good as mine. I would have sworn they would have come out with a new GT350, but here we are with a dark horse and a GTD. Honestly, nobody outside of Ford really knows what's next, but for once, I'm excited about it. A ton of other manufacturers like Dodge and Mercedes are abandoning fans and trying to spin off smaller displacement cars and EVs as equal replacements of V8s. Ford seems to really want to stick with the V8 platform, which leads to an incredibly bright future for us enthusiasts.